Well, hello everyone. Let's get started. Thanks for coming out tonight. My name is Martin Ogle, and I'm the Education Coordinator for Lafayette Open Space. And this is a Lafayette Open Space program. And it's about geese. And I think everyone here is pretty excited about geese, right? I was at Monica Lake about a week and a half ago. And I think it was the day that most or all of them flew in, because I hadn't seen any the day before other than a few Canada Geese flying around. And all of a sudden there was just thousands of them, and they're all squawking at the same time. And there and amongst them were some ducks and some gulls, seemingly almost going the same direction. And then right through the middle of them, the lower elevation, but right through the whole thing, went a single great horned owl. I don't think I've ever seen that before. And so I'm really excited that they're back. And 2 years ago, because we had so many questions about geese, we thought, well, let's put a program on geese together. And so I started working on it. And then I thought, well, you know what? I really need to get the help of Owen Robertson over here, because he's a great birder. And I had seen him a couple times just talking about birds, and I thought he would do a good program too. And well, we got to the evening, and I realized that I wasn't really needed. And so I had a lot of fun doing the program with Owen, and this year, 2 years later, Owen and his friend Kieran Schnitzspahn are going to present, and they're both seniors in high school this year. Owen goes to New Vista, right, and Kieran goes to Fairview, and so we're really happy to have them here presenting. And then also Julie Thompson, who's a teacher at Boulder High School, she actually teaches an ornithology class this year. And I say actually because I think is it the first one in Boulder County?
Well, there's one in New Vista also this year.
Co-taught by Owen.
Yeah, but yes, it is the first time it's been offered.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting too. And I was down doing a little presentation for their class, and I think there's a few of the members of the class that are here. So great, welcome to everyone. Otherwise, let's turn right over to Owen and Kieran, and thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Martin, for setting this whole program up for the second time. It's really fun, and I hope you all enjoy. So to start us off, I'm sure that many of you have gone birding the Lafayette Open Space Lafayette Birds program on the first Sunday of every month at Monica Lake and Greenwood Marsh, which you can see here. Or even if you haven't, you've probably been walking around near the lakes and reservoirs of Lafayette, of Boulder, of the Front Range, and you've probably seen some of the birds that we see all the time around here, like red-tailed hawks or double-crested cormorants, or maybe even a black-necked stilt, like the one in the top left corner. And while we're out birding, I say we because I do this too, we see all these very impressive birds, and we celebrate them and photograph them. And there is one group of birds that I find we tend to ignore a little bit. And those, of course, are the geese in all of their glory. So tonight we're really going to, as Martin said, focus on geese and dive deep into the surprisingly fascinating world of geese in Colorado and around the world. So, yes. As Aldo Leopold said, I'm sure many of you are familiar with him, he was one of the greatest conservationists and writers of the 20th century. He famously said that one swallow does not make a summer, but one skein of geese cleaving the murk of a March thaw is the spring. He famously loved geese, admired them, and revered them as icons of the primeval American wilderness. And if you look at Canada Geese now and say a primeval icon of an American wilderness, I think you'll get looked at pretty weirdly. But there's a reason for that, and we're going to get into that. So, yeah. This is our presentation on the geese of Colorado. And just so we're all on the same page to start, a little bit about the taxonomy of geese. This is all the stuff with the fancy Latin words that we use to categorize geese and classify them and understand where they are evolutionarily. So geese and all other ducks and swans are in the family Anatidae in the order Anseriformes. They share a lot of common characteristics like waterproof feathers, broad, flat-based bills, and webbed feet for swimming. And of course, they're all or mostly found around water in aquatic habitats. But today we're just going to focus on the geese in the genera Anser and Branta, specifically the ones that are found in Colorado. So that kind of places us where we are taxonomically. And now Kieran is going to tell us about our first group.
Yeah, so the first geese we're going to talk about are really special group of geese, which are white geese in Colorado, which are kind of these ones. These ones are actually specifically are snow geese, which are the larger of the two white geese. We can find small numbers of these in kind of the migrating flocks and wintering flocks that we have in Colorado. So like for every maybe 500 geese, cackling Canada geese, you'll usually find 5 or 6 snow geese in Colorado. That being said, if you go out onto the eastern plains, you can kind of see it in the map there. You can find thousands and thousands of white geese in the winter. Here's one of our snow geese at Wanaka, I believe. This is Ted Floyd's photo. So specific identification keys for snow geese is pretty obvious when you see one, just because they're massive and white. But if you want to specifically identify a white goose versus, so a white goose to species, so snow goose versus Ross's goose, you want to look at the bill mostly. On this one, you can kind of see it's got this nice big gape patch in the bill. They've got a nice big bill with a gape patch. So our next white goose is the Ross's goose, the cuter of the two. I love Ross's goose. The best way to describe them is cute. They're little diminutive white geese, and they're, the cackling geese. If snow geese are Canada geese, Ross's geese are cackling geese. They're the smaller, cuter, more interesting of the two birds. And on Ross's geese, you can kind of see they have this blue caruncle kind of thing on their small bills, and not really much of a gape patch. It's a nice Ross's goose in Socorro, New Mexico, where you can find a lot of numbers of them wintering. It's super cool to see massive numbers of white geese in the winter. I think that's like the coolest thing about white geese. You can see why they're called snow geese sometimes when you go out into these wintering flocks, when there's just thousands of them and they literally fill the sky like snow. So you can kind of see a better direct comparison here between a snow goose and a Ross's goose. The Ross's goose is behind the snow goose. So the snow goose has more of a nice long bill, long decurved neck. It's a little nicer, more like a swan. And the Ross's goose is a little rounder and has the cute stubby bill. This one in the center is a special bird. That's my photo actually, and that bird's a hybrid between the two geese. So you can kind of see it has the blue, it has the kind of stubbier bill, but it also has this gape patch, which makes it a nice example of a hybrid. This is one of these awesome flocks you can find them in. This one was taken in eastern Colorado. You can kind of see they mix it.
Yeah, so one kind of iconic type of goose for the Lafayette area especially is the hybrids between snow geese and cackling. The Ross's goose hybrid on the left here has that stubby bill with a little bit of a blue base and very little of that grin patch or gape patch. And the snow goose on the top right, its bill is black. That's primarily a juvenile feature. It's not necessarily a subspecific or an indicator of parentage, but it has a much longer bill, much kind of flatter head, and you can see indications of that grin patch forming already. And those can be clues to figuring out what parents these geese had, which is interesting to try and do. It's kind of a fun puzzle. Now we're going to get into some of the more uncommon geese that you can see in Colorado goose flocks. These are the quote-unquote really special ones. We're going to start off with the Brant. It's a weird name. In Europe it's called the Brent or Brent goose, but here in North America we just call it the Brant. And as you can see, it is quite distinctive. It's a small, all-dark goose with a small white collar, that's kind of variable, but an all-black head and gray wings and body. However, it can be surprisingly difficult to pick out of goose flocks. even though this bird on its own is extremely obvious for being different from a cackling geese when you have a flock of hundreds or thousands of cackling geese moving around in different directions and swirling and blocking each other and preening and making all sorts of noise. It can be really difficult to pick out this one rarer goose. But you definitely can do it. One thing that's extra interesting to pay attention to are the subspecies within the Brant. There are 3 main well-marked subspecies, plus a 4th, the gray-bellied Brant, which nobody actually knows if it's a subspecies, so it's not illustrated here. But the main one to know, and that we get here in Colorado, is the black Brant, the one in the center there. Some identification characteristics to point out. It has a very large, bold, near complete white color around the neck. And of course, true to its name, it's the darkest in overall coloration of the 3 subspecies, with a solid black belly contrasting with bright white flanks. Black Brant breeds up in the Pacific Northwest, in Alaska, and primarily winters in California. We of course get several in Colorado every year, but they are not regular or reliable. There are some other subspecies, the Atlantic Brant, which breeds up in eastern Canada and winters regularly on the eastern seaboard, as you can see up there. It's very distinctive, having a bright pale belly that contrasts solidly with its chest. There's also the dark-bellied Brant, which breeds in eastern Siberia and is very, very poorly known. As far as we know, I don't think one of these has ever made its way to Colorado, but it's almost certainly underreported and underobserved, so keep your eyes out, because you can find something really special in one of those goose flocks. Now, the other kind of medium, uncommon goose that you can find in Colorado is the greater white-fronted goose. It's pretty distinctive. It's got those bright, bold orange legs, an all-brown body, the namesake white front or forehead, and a bright pink bill, and some black mottling on the underparts. So it's very easy to tell apart from any other species of goose in Colorado if you get a good view, but it can be surprisingly difficult to find. This was the nemesis bird of both Kieran and me for several years, which means it's a bird that somebody tries to see and continues failing. So it can be definitely very difficult to lay eyes on, but a couple show up in Colorado in most geese flocks, and they even show up at Wanaka pretty reliably most years, so good one to keep your eyes out for. And they breed all around the world, similar to the Brant goose, but there are some subspecific differences. We get the Anser albifrons gambelli subspecies. You can see breeding up in red there with a dark blue wintering range that includes Colorado. But one subspecies to keep an eye out for, and that I kind of especially want to point out, is the tool goose, Anser albifrons elgassi, with the bright neon pink breeding range in a tiny, tiny area of south central Alaska and a similarly small wintering range in central California. This is a very rare, very threatened subspecies of greater white-fronted goose. It's similar to the subspecies we get here. It's a little bit larger and a little bit darker, and of course it hasn't been found to occur in Colorado, but it's similar enough and little known enough that I'm almost sure it has occurred pretty far east of its normal range, so definitely another thing to keep an eye out for, and something that's kind of an interesting subspecies of conservation concern. And of course, greater white-fronted goose can hybridize with cackling geese. These geese love to hybridize and make it confusing for us birders, but greater white-fronted goose hybrids are definitely very rare compared to snow cackling and Ross cackling combinations. You can see this one is a nice classic one. It's got that dusky orange bill, sign of its greater white-fronted goose parentage, and a little bit of white patterning on the front of the face, also found in greater white-fronted geese, but otherwise it looks kind of similar to a cackling goose with that hint of a white cheek patch and black neck. One thing that's interesting about these is you can see white speckling on the feathers all around the head and neck. Now, neither cackling geese nor greater white-fronted geese display white plumage there, and this feature of white occurring on places where it shouldn't of these hybrids is not uncommon. Ted Floyd found an example of one of these hybrids from Wanaka Lake with a near complete white head, but as of now, I'm not quite sure if anybody knows what causes this, because it seems like they shouldn't have it. No parent has it. Maybe some sort of gene, like a recessive gene, is activated by the hybrid pairing, but definitely something that's interesting and worth documenting, that sort of variation in these hybrids. that's fun. And finally, there are two rare vagrant geese that we kind of have to mention in Colorado, because if you see one of these, please tell me. They have occurred very, very rarely. The rarest one is the pink-footed goose, which has certainly occurred in Colorado just once, up in Longmont, I believe. This is a photo of that bird, taken by a very excited 10-year-old me. And obviously, it is relatively distinctive. The only goose that would be confused with it might be the greater white-fronted goose. You can compare it has a pink bill with a little bit of black at the base instead of the more orangey pink that greater white-fronted has. It obviously lacks the white forehead, has a darker chocolate head, has some scaling on the back. So pretty distinctive, but also kind of subtle to pick out. Then we have the barnacle goose, which has occurred maybe twice in Colorado, although its occurrence has been very confused due to it being very popular in captivity. Domestic barnacle geese are a really frequent sight. And now, of course, with our understanding of some of the rarer and more unusual geese in Colorado, we're going to talk about the real highlights, the Canada and Cackling Geese. And just already, I hope you noticed that within this kind of decried and oft-hated kind of bird, there is a surprising and fascinating range of variation, all the way from the tiny minima cackling goose of western Alaska to the quite literally giant Canada goose, the maxima subspecies, which weighs something like 20 pounds, compared to the minima, which is something like the size of a mountain. If you can imagine that. Just within this one bird, there is really an incredible variation in subspecies, in behavior, in range, and in history. So, yeah, we're going to start off with Canada Goose, the classic, most common species, and dive a little bit into the subspecies that you saw represented on that map. There are three main subspecies groups of Canada geese in the country. They are the Moffetti maxima group on the top left, the Canadensis group on the top right, and the Occidentalis fulva group on the bottom middle. These are found in the Pacific Northwest, the fulva birds, and they are, of course, the most easily distinguished. They've got that beautiful dark chestnut coloring on the chest and are overall much darker colored and a little bit smaller, kind of approaching the size of a cackling goose. But that coloration should make them very, very obvious. However, they have only occurred once in Colorado that we know of. So definitely something to keep an eye out for. The other two groups that occur regularly in Colorado are the Canadensis and Moffetti maxima groups, and they are very, very difficult to tell apart. You can play what's different about this picture between the two top photos and find no differences, because they are pretty much only different in size. Moffetti maxima are huge, and Canadensis are a little bit smaller and more petite. So that's definitely noticeable within a flock of Canada geese. But in a side-by-side view, aside from some slight differences in build proportion, they are nearly unidentifiable. Although maybe there's a field mark there that we just haven't noticed. That definitely happens. And of course, Canada geese breed and winter pretty much across the continent. Their year-round ranges, where they don't migrate, the purple here, have significantly expanded in the past several decades, from pre-colonial, pre-contact eras. That has become a much larger portion of their population, those non-breeding areas. So that's definitely very interesting. But what I think is most interesting about Canada Goose are their history. They were described, one of the first animals ever to be described to science officially by Linnaeus in his Systema Naturae, and given the name Brant canadensis. I think at that time the genus may have been different. This is a painting of the Canada Goose from 1813, when it was still kind of a hallmark of the unknown North American continent. And since then, in the 19th century and the 20th century, Canada geese began to undergo a tremendous decline. They bred on large open lakes and ponds or marshes that needed quite a large area. They are large body birds and very aggressive if you get close to them, so they do not tolerate other members of their species being too close for breeding, so they need a lot of space, and they fed on native sedge grasses and rushes things like that. So naturally, habitat clearance began to take its toll, as it did so with all other species of North American birds pretty much, and being so large and easy to see, hunting started to have a really significant impact in their populations. So much so that the giant Canada goose, the maxima subspecies, was feared extinct in the 1950s. Nobody thought there were any left until in 1962, people found a small population in Rochester, Minnesota. And since then, Canada geese have gone from being the wild denizens of marshes migrating from the high Arctic to the Gulf Coast for the winter, due to captive breeding programs and reintroduction efforts to help boost the population of giant Canada geese, and also due to kind of unknown changes that have allowed them to cope with humanity and exist feeding on our non-native grasses and nesting in our parking lots, as you can see. They have gone to this, which is, if anything, almost a little bit more impressive, that these wild icons of the wilderness have now become the icons of human-altered landscapes. They've undergone such a turnaround in population, ecology, and habitat that I think they are really special birds, really interesting, and really should kind of be admired for their adaptive flexibility and ecological willingness to change in response to these novel conditions. So yeah, they're definitely very cool. We've got some sounds up here where's the mouse? Okay. This is definitely useful in identification. We'll hear them again when we're specifically talking about goose identification. Cat can. There you go. Just keep in mind a long, slow, deep, low-pitched, classic honk for Canada goose. We're now going to hear about the other white-chinned goose.
All right, we've got cackling geese now. Yeah. There we go. Cackling geese are awesome. I love cackling geese. That might be a little bit of a controversial take, but I love cackling geese. I love how many of them there are. Basically, cackling geese are like when in winter, when you're looking for, when you go to a pond or a lake or anything, you're going to find so many cackling geese, especially in Colorado here. So this is their range here. We've got they breed up in the high Arctic, up in Canada and Alaska, and they winter down here in Colorado, Great Plains area, into Mexico, Gulf Coast a little bit of the Pacific Coast as well, Pacific Northwest in California, and also you can see over in Japan. So, like I said, cackling geese are just so many all the time. That top photo is actually from Colorado. You'll find them in just groups of thousands, and this is kind of a new thing, actually. Cackling geese have benefited from global warming in the high Arctic. Their breeding range has been able to expand because they are grass breeders and they feed on grass. So the increased amount of grass in the high Arctic has allowed them to kind of explode into these massive populations. So, maybe 30 years ago, we did not nearly have the numbers of cackling geese that we have today. This is a photo from Greenland Preserve. Cackling geese are kind of like I said before, the cuter, smaller friends of Canada geese. They've got a really nice, short, stubby bill, and they're a lot smaller than all of the Canada Goose subspecies. The cutoff between Canada geese and cackling geese is just that, basically, the 4 Cackling Goose subspecies are the 4 smallest of the group, because the Cackling Goose used to be a part of the Canada Goose as a species. They were only split recently.
2004.
2004. Yeah, so they've only been a species for about 20 years. So starting from the top left, on these subspecies. This top left one is the Aleutian cackling goose. I think it's Leucocolrus, if I'm remembering correctly. They're really probably the most striking of the cackling goose subspecies because of this nice, really big white color. That's really distinct, and they've got a nice darker body. They breed up in the Aleutian Islands, and I believe they're the ones who winter in Japan. That's the subspecies there. They're very rare in Colorado. You're not likely to find one, but that doesn't mean they're impossible to find. I know 10-foot is found one. I've wanted them before. To the right of that is the Minima cackling goose, which is kind of the Pacific cackling goose. They breed up in Alaska, and they winter in the Pacific Northwest and California. They're the smallest of the four, and they kind of still have that darker, smaller, cuter look to them, like the Aleutian cackling goose, and a smaller white ring than the Aleutians. To the bottom left, that one is a Richardson's cackling goose in Colorado. That's probably the most likely one you're going to find. They're kind of in the middle of the pack here. Some of them have a white color, some of them don't, and they have still that nice cute bill, but it's a little less stubby, and they're a little less small than the Minima cackling geese. And then the last one here is Taverners, which is the biggest of the four. They have a more sloping forehead there. That's the main ID factor. So a big factor of cackling goose identification is their call. And that's where they get their name from, actually. We'll talk about it a little bit more later, but they're a lot higher pitched and a little bit more. They sound like they're laughing, basically. They're a lot more more cute. That's the word for them. They're cute birds.
Yes, here you can kind of really hear the side-by-side sound. This is, again, really, really important for identifying them because you can get, this is the Cackling Goose. And the others group. And the Canada Goose. A little bit of audio issues there. Let's go back. Okay, and the Canada Goose. Again, that much lower pitched honk. So you can, that's really important because, well, an extreme cackling goose and an extreme Canada goose are just snap identifications. You can get really large, long-billed cackling geese and small, short-billed Canada geese, and they can really form a little bit of a gray area where identification is tough, and especially when big flocks of geese are flying overhead and calling, it's a lot more reliable to use that audio identification to figure out which species is which than trying to look at the bills of every single one. And here's just a really nice side-by-side view of a Canada goose, and I believe that's a Richardson's Canada goose. So you can really see the size difference here, of course. There's a faint white ring around the neck. If you see that on a bird, that's pretty much guaranteed to be cackling. Very stubby bill, and a much steeper forehead slope on the cackling. That's an important feature. So very obvious when you have extreme individuals like this side by side. But again, there is a gray area, especially with Taverners, cackling geese in the pond. And this is just a nice view of some cackling geese nestlings in their Arctic habitat. So,
Sure, yeah. So I think this is what I was getting on earlier about predation in the Arctic. Which is basically, cackling geese are a major part of predation in the Arctic, and they've been increasing because of this, due to global warming, due to the fact that ice permafrost is reducing in the high Arctic. Something else I actually wanted to note here about cackling geese in the high Arctic is that the reason we're seeing so many more Wanakee geese, the subspecies or the hybrids that have the white heads, is because of this expansion of cackling geese breeding grounds. They've started to intermingle with the breeding grounds of Russ's and snow geese. So it's been a lot more common as of late to find these hybrids. And that's part of the reason why we have so many in Colorado.
So, now that you hopefully know a little bit more about all the geese that are here in Colorado, we just wanted to wrap up with a message that life is better with a goose and life is better with tens of geese and thousands of geese as you can find in Colorado, even if they poop over your front lawn. And within those tens of thousands of geese, there's a surprising and delightful amount of variation and differentiation and history, and a lot of things to admire and respect, I think, about how geese have gotten to where they are today and how they're continuing to improve their lives and change their behaviors and ranges and populations as we move into the future. So yeah, I just wanted to leave you with that message. And we can wrap up here if anybody has any questions.
As a former biology teacher, I commend you both. Life is better when we have students like you two.
Thank you.
Now, and who knows, maybe we have an English version of David Attenborough right in front of us. But my question is, I live over by Stearns.
Yep.
And I keep almost a daily monitor on the geese that are there, as well as the bald eagles and the Phrygian hawks and so forth. But I'm wondering why, when I walk around Stearns, I see very few of the Brant maximus or any of the smaller ones, but hundreds and hundreds of cacklers. Why is there such a population difference between the two?
Yeah, so first of all, one reason that can give that impression is Canada and cackling geese tend to self-sort, so they only really hang out with other members of their same species. So if there happens to be a big cackling goose flock that's taking up the whole area of the reservoir or the lake, there aren't just going to be many Canada goose mixed in like that, because they do distinguish between members of their species. So that's definitely a component. And as for the sheer numbers of cackling geese, we just have so many wintering that they vastly outnumber the Canada geese that stay here.
I think it's also important to mention, in the winter, it's primarily it's primarily these cackling geese, because our summering population, our breeding population, is that maxima. So whenever you're out in the summer, at the park, looking at geese, those are the Moffett maxima. Really nice big Canada geese, but in winter it's a lot harder to find them, because they're usually mixed in these massive flocks.
So I was wondering, do the cackling geese usually have a shorter neck than the Canadian
Yes,
geese? Or it's not necessarily always true? I know proportionally, size-wise, the birds are different, but the neck, I was wondering about the length.
Yeah, that's one of the ID factors as well. They do have the smaller neck. Usually you won't see Canada or cackling geese curve their neck as much as the Canada geese when they're feeding on the ground. That's one of the identification factors that you can
Yeah, I
find.
was just wondering, because that one picture, when you had them side by side, the neck of the cackling goose there looked, pretty long. The smaller, that slide where you have, or the little slide.
It can be a little bit ambiguous because neck shape and size can change a lot with posture. So if you have a really relaxed Canada goose that's kind of like holding its neck in, and a cackling goose that's alert or finding something, its neck can look far longer than it normally might. So it can be a little bit variable, and obviously you will have extremes on either end of the spectrum. But if you have two similarly excited Canada Cackling Geese side by side, then yeah, neck length is definitely going to be important.
Really well done lecture, it was very entertaining.
Thank you.
Kind of a segue from the neck length, kind of curious since you introduced the sounds for the cackling and the goose, or the Canada Goose, what causes the anatomy in the neck to cause a hum versus a cackling? Do you know?
I'm not sure if there are,
It's physical size, actually, right?
Yeah, maybe something like that.
It's, I think it's like a mixture of physical size, like, so their larynxes are, that's the right word? Cirrus, yeah.
I think, yeah.
The vocal cords are actually like physically bigger on the Canada geese, which is like the reason people have deeper voices as well. Like larger vocal cords make deeper sounds. And also, the calls by birds are generally learned as well as genetic. So there's something to that too, where they probably learn to call partially from their parentage.
I have a question about Stearns Lake that you probably know the answer. I was out there today and I saw the eagles are back. Are those the eagles that lost their nest, or are they different ones, or what's going on out there?
Actually,
Not
no.
sure. I do not know. They definitely could be. I would assume that the breeding pair, that's there consistently is the same every year, so I could definitely imagine
Yeah.
that the ones that are there now are the same, but
But they went away after the nest fell,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, one died, one was killed.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, one eagle was killed, and I've heard, there was an article in the paper, and Hometown Weekly this week about that nest. And another eagle has replaced, I think it was a female that was killed, when lightning struck a tree.
Oh, really? But yeah, I'm not sure if there's a definitive way to tell without like.
Well, there's a new
banding or
pair,
breeding.
anyway. There were definitely two. In the normal places, one sits on the far side
Oh,
in
yeah.
that tree, and then one up in the big tree. Thank you very much.
Actually, I have something else to add too. Bald eagles are pretty cool too, because like Canada geese, they're one of the great success stories of conservation in the modern age. They've been expanding so crazy that we have like, common ones that we know and love at our local parks and stuff.
Right.
So, I love bald eagles as well.
So I just wondered, in passing, you had mentioned that they eat what, sedges and grass shoots?
Yeah.
Do they eat water plants as well, or grasshoppers, or is it exclusively, I see lots of them in fields. The fields look all brown and dry, but they're obviously finding small shoots.
Yeah, I'm not sure to the comment about grasshoppers. I know some birds do change their diet when they have young to take in increased amounts of protein to help feed developing young. So Canada
Well, I
geese
just
may do
meant, do
that,
they
but
eat
I'm not
anything
sure. But yeah,
besides grass?
they certainly have gotten a lot more flexible, of course, with their new kind of existence within human communities and societies. So yeah, they used to just be primarily like native grasses and native waterside plants. I'm not sure if they ever went for like plants in the water then, but since then they have, evolved to take advantage of things like grain fields and places like that.
What are they doing in the water then if they're not looking for something to eat?
I think they kind of just like it.
Yeah.
Really?
Just kind of hang out.
Yeah, I mean, I know they feed on the grasses in like fields. That's why you'll see them do movements from kind of fields. Like near my high school is actually a really good example. There's a bunch of soccer fields pretty close, and then there's Feely Lake beneath the school. So basically, you can see the geese cycling through both the grasses at the soccer fields and near the school, back down to the lake, and so on and so forth, just back and forth.
Might be able to shed some light on those eagles over at Stearns. I keep track of them almost on a daily basis. It appears that they've built a new nest. Go to Dillon Road and 96th and look to the northwest. There are 2 trees out in the pasture. And the one that's closest to Dillon Road has a nest about the size of the podium. And they're there almost on a daily basis. even though from where I live, up on the ridge, just south of Stearns, I see eagles. Now, it's hard to tell if they're the same ones without banding or some sort of telemetry, but it appears to be the same ones come over there to hunt the prairie dogs almost every day. So if you're seeing bald eagles at Wanakee, and we're seeing them at the same time over by Stearns, it would not be unlikely that there could be another pair that's come in, because, as they say, if the habitat is there, they will come.
So you mentioned that the Cackling Geese have only been a species for about the past 20 years or so, right? Before that, they were considered the Canada Geese? So
Yes.
what caused the change? Why did they become their own species? I mean, they've always existed as Cackling Geese, but what caused that change?
So it's one of many, many species in this kind of revolution in bird taxonomy and stuff, which is genetic testing, basically. So they found that genetic, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. They found that the genetics of these smaller 4 subspecies of Canada Goose were significantly different enough from the other 4 to make them a species. And, you know, speciation is kind of a complicated thing. It's always fluctuating, changing, lumps, splits, all that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think this genetic data, I'm not totally sure about this, but I think it revealed that things like the Hawaiian goose or nene are the closest relatives of the Canada goose, whereas birds like the Brant from earlier in the slideshow are the closest relatives of the Cackling Goose. So I think that sort of like genetic phylogeny has indicated that there is like really significant difference to the point where they may not even be each other's closest relatives. I'm not sure if that's accurate, but it is like, that's a possibility. And along with that, it's just more and better understanding of the field marks that differentiate things like a taverner's Cackling Goose and a small Canadensis Canada Goose. We're constantly learning how to tell those apart in the field and how morphological differences can be there and we haven't noticed them before. So, but primarily genetic data, like Kieran said. Questions?
I don't have a question about the program. I think you did a fantastic job. I just wonder if either of you is going to look at this as a college topic.
Yeah, I mean, my life goal sort of is to be a researcher, hopefully focusing on avian evolution and sort of bird ecology and evolutionary biology. So yeah, definitely this sort of thing is what I love doing and what I hope to continue doing. So,
Yeah, I mean, I'm planning on majoring in environmental studies and economics in college, and my plan is to try to write laws to conserve bird habitat and such. So that's also part of my career path.
You did a fantastic job.
All right, well, thank you so much. It was a great program and great questions, so appreciate you all coming out. We can hang out and